All right, strap in everyone. Today we are taking a deep dive into the Baha'i Faith.
Ooh, fun.
And trust me, this is going to be a little different than your typical religion rundown.
Oh, how so?
Well, we've got articles and research, the usual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to be pulling out some of the really interesting and, let's be honest, kind of mind-bending stuff. You ready to have some of those assumptions challenged?
I think so, but hit me with it.
Okay, so you know how we flagged those 3 principles in our prep?
You mean progressive revelation, harmony of science and religion, and independent investigation of truth.
Yeah, those 3 kind of turn everything we think we know about religion on its head.
I mean, yeah, that's why we picked them.
Right, like progressive revelation. I was always taught that religions claim to have the final word on things, you know?
Yeah, the whole, this is the ultimate truth, end of story thing.
Exactly. But the Baha'i Faith seems to embrace this idea that our understanding of God is always evolving.
It's really a core concept for them. It's like, God's guidance isn't a one-time download.
More like a software update.
Exactly. It's an ongoing conversation with humanity. Think about figures like Abraham, Jesus, Muhammad. They all brought crucial pieces to the puzzle.
Right, responding to the needs of their times.
Exactly. And the Baha'i Faith believes that Mahalla, their most recent prophet, brought the latest chapter in this unfolding revelation.
So each of these figures builds on the teachings that came before, but none of them have the complete and final truth.
That's the idea. And Baha'u'llah's book, the Kitab-i-Iqan, really digs into this. He explains that claims of finality in the past were often, well, misinterpreted.
Wait, hold up. So are you saying those pronouncements in other religions about being the last prophet weren't meant literally?
It all comes down to understanding the context. Baha'u'llah was pointing out that people often took symbolic language in scriptures too literally.
I see. Like they were missing the deeper meaning.
Right, and that misinterpretation often led to all sorts of division and dogma.
Makes sense. So what did Baha'u'llah do differently?
Well, he reinterpreted a lot of those traditional symbols, like, for example, heaven and hell.
Ooh, good one.
He said they're not actual physical places, but spiritual states.
Interesting.
It's about closeness to or distance from God. It shifts the focus from reward and punishment to, our own internal journey.
Whoa, that's a huge difference from that whole fiery pit image I grew up with. What about other concepts like the end times or even resurrection?
Those are reinterpreted too. They're not about literal events, but about inner transformation.
So resurrection isn't about bodies popping out of graves?
No, it's about spiritual awakening.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
It's all about continuous growth and understanding, both individually and as a society.
I'm already seeing how this progressive revelation idea challenges a lot of those us versus them mentalities that we see with religion.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more about finding that common thread.
And speaking of common threads, that leads us right into our next principle, which is the harmony of science and religion. This one is especially interesting, I think, for folks who love logic, A&D spirituality.
I've always thought that science and religion should complement each other, not be at odds.
Me too.
But how does the Baha'i Faith actually reconcile these two?
Well, they start with the source. Both science and religion ultimately come from God, they say.
So they're both ways of understanding truth.
Exactly. Science helps us decode the physical world, while religion provides us with that moral and ethical framework for how we should use that knowledge.
I see. So it's not about science disproving faith.
Right.
Or faith rejecting scientific discoveries.
It's recognizing that they each have their own domain, and if you ignore one, you're weakening the other.
And this gets really cool because Baha'u'llah's teachings can actually help us reinterpret ancient texts in a way that aligns with modern scientific discoveries.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Remember those 7 heavens we were talking about before?
Oh, yeah. So you're saying they aren't literal layers in the sky?
Yep.
What are they then?
They're stages of spiritual progress, more like a metaphor for our journey towards the divine.
Oh, wow.
And even the age of the earth, which has been such a point of contention between science and religion.
Yeah.
The Baha'i Faith views that metaphorically too.
That's wild. So we aren't talking about a literal 6-day creation.
Right. It's more about the unfolding of God's plan across vast stretches of time, which science has now revealed to us.
The Baha'i Faith really embraces those scientific advancements. They see those discoveries as actually illuminating the spiritual truths that are already embedded in those ancient texts.
I love that. It challenges that blind faith stereotype that people so often attach to religion.
Right.
It seems like the Baha'i Faith actually encourages people to use their minds minds to think critically,
Absolutely.
to use reason alongside faith.
And that brings us to that third principle you mentioned, independent investigation of truth. This is maybe the most revolutionary one, I think, because it has huge implications not just for individuals, but potentially for all of society.
Okay, this is where I need you to break it down for me.
Sure.
If there's no blind faith, how does a religious community even function?
Well, the Baha'i Faith encourages every single person to question, to explore, to look at different perspectives, and to arrive at truth through their own individual effort.
So no blindly following, even within the Baha'i Faith.
That is the idea. They don't even have a clergy class like many other religions do.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Instead, they use these elected bodies at local, national, and international levels to guide their affairs.
So it's more like a grassroots democracy than a top-down hierarchy.
That's a great way to put it.
I'm sure that ruffles some feathers in more traditional religious settings.
I'm sure it does.
But what would happen if everyone, not just Baha'is, embraced this independent investigation of truth?
That's where it gets really interesting. Imagine a world where progress is actually driven by merit and truth.
Right. Not blind allegiance to power or tradition.
Think about the implications for education, for politics, even for how we consume information online.
Whoa, my mind is already exploding with possibilities.
It would challenge the existing power structures that rely on control and obedience.
I am already feeling so much more hopeful just thinking about it. But before we get too carried away, I think we need to take a closer look at how these principles actually play out in the real world.
Agreed.
Because, it's one thing to talk about them in theory, but how do they actually work in practice?
That is the key question, and that is what we will be exploring next.
I am so ready.
Get ready for some real-world examples of how these seemingly radical ideas are already making a difference all over the world.
I am all ears. This deep dive is just getting started. All right, so we've been talking about these fascinating and honestly kind of radical principles of the Baha'i Faith.
Yeah, they really challenge the status quo.
But now I'm really curious to see how they actually play out in real-world situations. Like, what does independent investigation of truth look like in, say, the classroom?
Oh, that's a good one. Imagine a classroom where questioning isn't just allowed, it's actively encouraged. Students aren't just passively absorbing information, they're actually participating in building knowledge.
So it's not the sage on the stage model, but something much more interactive.
Exactly. Instead of rote memorization, the emphasis is on developing critical thinking skills.
Okay, so we're talking about skills like analysis, problem solving, evaluating different perspectives.
Right, and imagine graduating not just with a bunch of facts crammed in your head, but with a toolkit for navigating a world where information is constantly bombarding us.
Especially in the age of the internet, those skills are more important than ever.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's education. What about something even bigger, like the global climate crisis?
Ooh, that's a great example.
How does that harmony of science and religion principle help us address that?
Well, science gives us the data. We can't deny that.
Right.
But the Baha'i teachings remind us that knowledge without action is kind of meaningless.
You have to actually do something with that knowledge.
Right. So it's about recognizing that caring for the planet isn't just a scientific necessity.
It's a spiritual obligation, a moral imperative.
Exactly. So instead of getting caught up in the debate between science and religion, the Baha'i Faith is saying, let's bring those two perspectives together.
I love that.
Science tells us about the problem, and our values, our sense of interconnectedness, well, those compel us to act.
It's a holistic approach, right? Recognizing that we can't separate our own well-being from the well-being of the planet.
And that approach can be applied to other global issues too.
Like poverty, conflict, injustice.
Exactly. The Baha'i teachings really emphasize unity and justice for all people.
But how do you achieve that kind of unity in a world that just seems to be getting more and more divided, especially along religious lines?
Well, that's where those other principles come into play. Remember that idea of progressive revelation? It encourages us to respect all religions as part of that one unfolding truth.
Yeah, instead of seeing them as rivals.
Right. So it fosters interfaith dialogue and understanding.
That we're talking about building bridges instead of walls.
That's the idea. And the Baha'i community is a great example of this in action.
Oh, how so?
They have people from all walks of life, different backgrounds, different beliefs.
Yeah.
And they maintain unity not through forced conformity,
Right.
but by valuing each individual's contribution.
It's that idea of unity and diversity.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another key principle, which is consultation.
Oh, yeah, that one's interesting. So how does that work in practice?
Well, instead of imposing decisions from the top down, the Baha'i Faith really emphasizes collaboration and dialogue.
So it's more about finding consensus.
Exactly. Decisions are made through respectful conversation, seeking common ground even when there are differences of opinion.
I'm starting to see how all of these principles weave together, creating this framework for a more unified and just society.
That's the power of it.
Yeah.
But it's not just about grand, sweeping social changes.
No.
It starts with personal transformation.
Okay, so how does the Baha'i Faith address that inner work?
It emphasizes cultivating virtues like kindness, compassion, trustworthiness.
It's about being the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly. And it's not about these grand gestures,
right,
but about those small daily acts of integrity and kindness.
I like that. It reminds me of that quote, be the change that you wish to see in the world. So it's not about waiting for someone else to fix things.
Right.
It's about taking responsibility for our own little corner of the universe.
And as you start living those principles, you'll likely be drawn to connect with other people who share those values.
That's where the Baha'i community comes in.
Exactly. And the Baha'i Faith provides that supportive environment for continuing to grow and learn.
This has been incredibly enlightening. The Baha'i Faith offers such a unique and hopeful vision for the future of humanity.
It really does.
But I know our listeners are probably eager to hear your final thoughts on how these principles can really shape our lives and our world.
Well, what strikes me most is this. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's happening in the world today, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
But the Baha'i Faith reminds us that each individual act of kindness, each effort to promote understanding, it truly matters.
I love that. We aren't powerless.
Not at all. And one of the things I find so practical about the Baha'i teachings is that they offer concrete guidance on how we can live a more meaningful life.
So it's not just about these lofty ideals.
Right. It's about putting those ideals into action.
So it's about cultivating those virtues we discussed, kindness, compassion, trustworthiness, and letting them guide our actions.
Absolutely. And the Baha'i community provides that support network, those opportunities for growth through devotional gatherings, study circles, community service projects.
It's about finding those practical outlets to express those principles.
Exactly. And when you see the Baha'i community living out these teachings, it's truly inspiring.
It's proof that it's possible to create a more unified and just world.
It definitely is.
This deep dive has really given us a lot to think about.
It has.
The Baha'i Faith offers such a unique and hopeful vision, grounded in those core values of unity, justice, and continuous spiritual growth.
And it's a vision that each one of us can contribute to.
Okay, so before we wrap up,
sure,
I'd love to hear your advice for our listeners. They are intrigued by these concepts, but maybe a little unsure where to go next.
Well, I would say approach the Baha'i teachings with an open mind and a sincere heart.
Okay.
Read the writings of Baha'u'llah, connect with the Baha'i community in your local area, and experience those principles firsthand.
It's an invitation to embark on a journey of discovery.
It is.
To connect with a community that embraces those values.
Yeah.
To contribute to a world that reflects those ideals.
That's the essence of the Baha'i message. It's recognizing our shared humanity, embracing unity and justice, working together for the betterment of everyone.
And that message resonates so deeply, especially in the world we live in today.
It does.
The Baha'i Faith offers this beacon of hope, this vision of a future where peace and unity prevail. But, and here's the key, it's a vision that requires each of us to play our part.
That's the challenge and the invitation we're leaving with our listeners today.
Explore the Baha'i teachings, reflect on these principles, and consider how you might contribute to building a world that reflects those beautiful values.
Beautifully said.
It has been a true pleasure exploring the Baha'i Faith with you.
It's been my pleasure as well.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Baha'i Faith. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep diving deep. All right, we're back and ready to wrap up this incredible deep dive into the Baha'i Faith. You know, before we went to, I guess not a break, we were talking about how even the most daunting journey starts with a single step.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
So for our listeners who are out there feeling all inspired by these Baha'i principles, but maybe also a little overwhelmed, like where do I even begin? What would you say is a good first step to actually bringing these principles into their daily lives?
You know, it really can be something as simple as shifting your perspective. Like, instead of just focusing on everything that feels wrong in the world, start looking for opportunities to actually embody those virtues we've been talking about. Kindness, compassion, honesty, trustworthiness.
Yeah.
Those aren't just these abstract ideals. They're choices that we can make in any given moment.
So it's less about those grand gestures and more about those small, everyday actions.
Exactly. Like choosing patience over frustration when you're stuck in traffic.
Oh, it was a tough one.
Or speaking up against injustice, even when it feels uncomfortable or risky.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And I think, as you start living more intentionally, more consciously, you might find yourself feeling drawn to connect with other people who are trying to live by those same values.
And that's where the Baha'i community comes in, right? They have all those resources and activities that we talked about earlier. So for our listeners who are curious, what are some good ways to, just kind of dip their toes into that community?
Well, a great place to start is with their devotional gatherings. Those are open to everyone, no matter what your background is.
Oh, nice.
It's a chance to experience the more spiritual side of the Baha'i faith, like their prayers and writings.
I like that. Kind of a low-pressure way to get a feel for things.
Exactly. And then they also have study circles.
Oh, cool. So like a book club, but for spiritual teachings.
You got it.
Yeah.
You can explore the writings in more depth and have those meaningful conversations.
And what about those service projects that we touched on earlier?
Yes. Service to humanity is huge in the Baha'i Faith.
Mm-hmm.
They have tons of different initiatives, from local community projects to international development work.
So you can really put those principles into action.
It's all about channeling that inspiration into making a real difference in the world.
It's like that saying, faith without works is dead.
I love that.
It's not enough to just talk about these values, you have to actually live them.
And I think that's what's so beautiful about the Baha'i community.
Yeah.
They provide this really supportive environment for doing that inner work and putting those principles into practice.
Where you're not in it alone.
Right. You're surrounded by people who are on that same journey, striving to embody those same values. I think that's a really important takeaway for our listeners today. You don't have to become a Baha'i to find value and meaning in these teachings. There's so many different ways to engage with these principles, whether it's through personal reflection or connecting with the community or finding ways to serve others.
Yeah, it's all about finding what resonates with you and taking those first steps.
This has been such a fascinating and insightful deep dive. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners feel that same sense of inspiration.
Me too.
The Baha'i Faith offers such a hopeful and really quite practical vision for humanity.
It does.
It's grounded in these core values of unity, justice, and that continuous spiritual growth.
And it's a vision that needs each of us to play our part in bringing it to life.
That's a really powerful message. It can be easy to get discouraged by everything going on in the world.
Absolutely.
But the Baha'i Faith reminds us that we each have a role to play in building a better future.
We all have something to contribute.
It has been a true pleasure exploring these ideas with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's been a great conversation. And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring these Baha'i teachings on your own. There's a whole world of wisdom and inspiration waiting to be discovered. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.